Hello and welcome to the Counterpoint podcast, our regular look at the changing landscape in technology. And today we're going to delve into the subject of Open RAN, so Open Radio Access Networks, which is a kind of a growing focus for telecom operators, some of the smaller players within the mobile infrastructure ecosystem. And I'm joined today by two of my fellow directors. So, Gareth Owen. Hello, Gareth. How are you today?
Hi, Peter.
Is the weather as good in North Wales as it is down here?
It's very nice. Yeah, very sunny, very hot. Yeah.
Excellent. And we're also joined by Neil Shah. Hello, Neil. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks. So Open RAN. So, here we are, in the transitioning period from 4G to 5G. A lot of capex involved in that transition, and quite a shift potentially as we kind of look forward to the way that networks are configured. But maybe we can sort of start by looking a little bit of the background, because Open RAN has been it's been on the radar for a few years, but seems to have been gaining a bit of momentum. So, Gareth, do you want to start us off and kind of explain why Open RAN is coming, more into focus?
Okay, well, basically the RAN market today is dominated by a small number of vendors, mainly Huawei, Ericsson, and Nokia, but also Samsung and ZTE. And the technology is proprietary, so that means that the software is tightly coupled to the hardware, and the interfaces are also proprietary. So that means, for example, the interfaces between the radios and the basebands, these are called the CPRI links. So that means that you have to, when you buy the baseband, you have to buy the radios as well from the same vendor. So a lot of the operators, some more than others, are crying out for sort of more vendor diversity. They want to see new players enter the market, which will generate sort of more competition, lower prices, and end this sort of current reliance on a small number of vendors. So Open RAN is basically about two things. First of all, disaggregation. So that means sort of splitting the hardware from the software so that you can buy software from a choice of different vendors and then hardware from another set of vendors. And very importantly, this hardware is built using sort of standard processors, so mostly x86 based processors, running on commercial off-the-shelf hardware. So that's sort of servers from Cisco, HPE, etc. And the second part is the open interfaces. So this means replacing the various proprietary interfaces in the RAN, like for example, the frontal CPRI interface I just mentioned. So that means that you could sort of mix and match components. So you could buy radios maybe from Samsung and the basebands from Ericsson or Nokia or whatever. At least that's the theory. So there are also a number of other interfaces, for example, the X2 interface, which connects different basebands. But the one that gets the most publicity at the moment is the frontal interface.
Okay, excellent explanation, Gareth. Thanks. So, Neil, turning to you, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball question, or a googly, if we're using cricket terminology. So, one of the tensions in the industry at the moment is, a lot of operators have been relying on Huawei, increasingly relying on Huawei, and as we kind of shift towards 5G, Huawei's been a big player there. So is there's pressure on operators in different markets to reduce their reliance on Huawei. Is that also kind of playing into the Open RAN story as well?
Sort of, because as Gareth said, the market is quite concentrated. Like three players having more than 80% of the revenue share, and out of the third, if Huawei goes, the two gets even bigger. So the vendor diversity options reduces considerably. So the Open RAN initiative just takes care of that, where operators have flexibility to choose vendors, not only hardware but software vendors, for having more competition in the market, lowering the costs as well, and more flexibility to mix and match, as Gareth said, right? So the Huawei situation rightly plays into the need for openness and diversity of different radio access network pieces.
Okay. And, if we think about, so as Gareth says, this is, there's a lot of work going on here and a lot of interest from mobile operators. But are we seeing commercial deployments yet? I mean, I know there's been some issued by Vodafone and Telefonica, amongst others, and some operators, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about Rakuten shortly. But, where are we in terms of commercial deployment? I mean, is it a reality now, or is this something which is, going to be perpetually a year away, or, where are we?
Yeah, there are a few commercial services, but they're actually 4G, not 5G. So you mentioned Rakuten. So obviously there's lots of publicity behind that. They launched the services back in April. And they're also planning a 5G service launch, they say, in September, which may probably be delayed to the end of the year. But apart from that, there's some other services, smaller services, for example, a joint venture between Telefonica and Facebook in Peru, which I think is actually technically the first commercial Open RAN deployment. So they have around 650 sites, of which about half of them are Open RAN and the rest are traditional. Then there are some small deployments. There's a company called Optimia in Alaska, and then a few other sort of rural networks. I think Parallel Wireless has launched a commercial service in Ghana, for example. So there are a handful of what you would say proper commercial services, but they're all 4G, and also importantly, they're also greenfield networks. They're not based on legacy networks. But on top of that, you've got a lot of trials done by the major operators. You mentioned Telefonica and Vodafone, and they're doing testing all over Europe and several countries. And you've got NTT Docomo carried out some pre-commercial trials on its 5G network last year using the O-RAN 7.2 interface. So there's lots of testing, but not that many commercial services at the moment.
Neil, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's we are at the cusp of 5G transition, and I think there is an increasing need and diversity in suppliers, and we'll see more deployments as everyone solidifies their 5G strategy. Maybe not in the first wave of 5G deployment, we will see, because possibly Open RAN spec is slightly behind when you compare it with the 3GPP standards versus 5G. Gareth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is the reason where we are seeing more 4G deployments right now, and 5G deployments we'll see maybe moving forward. But the initial 5G deployments have been mostly on the integrated and hardware from a single vendor, or not more of with open interfaces, basically proprietary interfaces.
So, I mean, we talked about a few players here. Obviously, the big 3 infrastructure vendors, and Gareth, you've mentioned some of the smaller ones. But who are the main stakeholders in the Open RAN ecosystem? And are there any standards bodies or kind of interest groups that are driving this as well?
Well, there's a couple of more industrial, lobbying or standards bodies, like for example, O-RAN Alliance, and then the TIP, the TIP has got an Open RAN sort of initiative as well. Those are the 2 sort of main bodies driving the standards and the specifications, etc. In terms of the players, you've got a lot of new software players. For example, Altiostar, Mavenir, Parallel Wireless, JMA Wireless, Radisys. These are all US companies, except for Radisys, which is I think owned by Reliance Jio. Then you've got a lot of the traditional radio vendors who are now looking at the Open RAN market, like Airspan, MTI, Benetel in Ireland. But on top of that, you've got the big IT and networking companies who see this as a completely new business opportunity, and I think they can leverage their expertise here. So I'm talking about companies like Cisco, HP, Dell, Oracle, and also quite a few sort of companies looking at the edge server market, or the MEC server market, and coming up with sort of new designs, new developments, for example, lamppost-size vRAN and edge computing products. So you've got companies like AdLink, Supermicro, a lot of other companies involved in that sort of space. And then finally, on the chip side, you've got Intel, which is the only company that offers layer 1 acceleration solutions. But NVIDIA is also getting involved in this in quite a big way, as well as companies like Xilinx and Qualcomm.
Okay. And, when we think about, the other sort of transitions that are going on in the networking space, I mean, one of the big ones has been this virtualization. So, Neil, I mean, is virtualization of the network elements, is that sort of implicated in this in this shift towards Open RAN as well, or is that just a separate trend which has been taking place anyway, and it's sort of coincidence that it's kind of running together with this trend towards open radio access networks?
Yeah, that is an excellent observation. Actually, if you look at most of the last few years, as we had evolved 4G architecture and moving to a 5G architecture, most of the functions are actually virtualized. And if you look at Open RAN, right, the level 1, level 2, level 3, all the OSI levels, right, are being virtualized and softwareized. And as a result, once we virtualize is basically bringing cloud and running everything in the cloud, all the functions, and less hardware. And basically, with Open RAN, essentially what Open RAN is doing is playing to this, where you're disaggregating hardware and software, disaggregating radio and baseband, and having multiple ways to virtualize it at different levels. And that is where, to Gareth's point, we are seeing entry of all the IT players into this ecosystem, because now your network architecture is looking more like IT infrastructure or IT architecture, right? And that's why IT was the first sector which undergone virtualization, and now it's the same thing is happening to network side of things.
Yeah, can I add something? All these incumbents from Huawei, Nokia, Samsung, etc., they're all sort of deploying vRAN products right now, and they've all developed the products. So, Nokia and Samsung have already done this, and Nokia came out with a new product called vRAN 2 quite recently. I think it's last week. But they're all, whether it's Open RAN or not, that they're all doing the virtualization, because that's a key part of being cloud native. So you can't do that without disaggregating the software from the hardware. But you could have a situation where, the vRAN is all Nokia or all Huawei, whatever, but still being disaggregated. So it's and the other scenario is obviously with Open RAN, you'd have a disaggregated RAN with software and hardware from different vendors.
Right. And to add to that, actually, one analogy which I would like to give is think about 20 years ago, we used to have different hardware for different functions. We used to have a digital camera. We used to have a Atari game. Everything was very integrated with their own software and hardware, right? But then came the smartphone era in 2008, when we had Android, and Android actually open sourced everything, right from software. And now, the help of applications, we can now virtualize every hardware we had before into software, into cloud, right? So now one device, one smartphone can do almost everything, right? So what has happened is we disaggregated hardware and software and made it open, and we have more functionalities, everything in cloud. Gaming is in cloud, camera, photography, eventually the photography sits in the cloud, and everything is software run.
I guess some people would argue that vinyl records are still better than streaming media, but we'll leave that argument for another time.
Yeah, you can't carry vinyl records on the train, right? On the metro.
No.
And they work when they don't have any internet.
Well, there is that too. But and maybe that's a good segue to sort of talk about some of the challenges here, because it sounds like moving to a more kind of open kind of open source way of working is probably presents a potential for operators to reduce some of the costs and to drive more diversity. But I guess it's not a there's no such thing as a free lunch. So what are the challenges that really kind of face the Open RAN development?
Yeah, well, Neil mentioned that the Open RAN is a little bit behind mainstream 5G technology, and that's true in terms of performance and scalability. But I think the operators have a few concerns with respect to network reliability, the increased complexity of these networks, interoperability, because you're using sort of components from different vendors or software as well as hardware from different vendors, and is it going to all work together? So network performance, that's another one. In dense sort of metro areas, will it work as well as standard 5G technology? So these are a lot of the issues that the operators are concerned about, and this is why there is so much interest in Rakuten. Because if they can solve these problems or demonstrate that it can work in a country like Japan, then I think that could be sort of a major boost, a major catalyst for Open RAN.
Neil, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly right on the note. And what I would like to add, coming back to my Android analogy, like Android was great, Android moment was great. So if we are getting an Android moment in network space, it will be also suffering from the fragmentation, right? As Gareth said, there could be software which would not be updated at the same time from multiple vendors, though interfaces are open. Again, interoperability is going to be a key challenge because of the fragmentation. And again, if a particular operator is very well covered in terms of updating the software from different vendors working with different hardware, but if a user is roaming across from one operator to other or one cell site to other which have different vendors, we don't know how it's going to work, whether it's going to work seamlessly like it would work with just a single vendor offering. So that is a challenge which we see. Apart from that, fragmentation in terms of geographical political issues, that is also going to be big thing if every country, like a bigger country like US or China, Japan, they have their own way of deploying Open RAN.
Yeah, I think that's why this announcement from Nokia is interesting, because Nokia is offering an old Nokia solution, but with the option of open interfaces. So they're sort of they have this sort of open but integrated approach, which basically means that they can offer integrated modules to operators. For example, sort of specific RU, DU, CU combinations, and then connect it to other integrated modules, but via an open interface. So basically, they're sort of trying to offer the best of both worlds here. They're saying to an operator, look, we can offer you a 5G solution from a single vendor, from an experienced single vendor, with open interfaces. So initially, you can take an old Nokia solution, but then a few years down the line, when it's time to do some network upgrade, you can go to alternative vendors for the radios, for example, or some of the software. So that sort of thinking and that kind of strategy, I think, sort of takes the wind out of the sails of some of the new entrants, because it offers the operators sort of the best of both worlds.
So if we look forward then, and as we kind of try and wrap up this discussion, looking out the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, I mean, do you think that, as you said, Gareth, that the larger kind of incumbent vendors will increasingly follow Nokia's lead and increasingly try and sort of open more open interfaces?
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next sort of next few months, to see how much interest there is with this Nokia solution. If Nokia sort of secures a number of new contract wins, then other incumbents, particularly Ericsson, I think, will have to follow suit, and especially in the US market, where there's a lot of interest in Open RAN, political interest. And if Nokia and Ericsson are competing against each other, Nokia is offering an Open RAN or open interface solution, and Ericsson is not, then clearly Nokia is going to is in a much stronger position. So I think I think it'd be interesting to see what happens over the next few months and how the market reacts to this. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, Neil, do you want to add anything to a few final thoughts about where you see this going in the next 3 years?
Yeah, I think the adoption would be definitely high compared, because operators, small, big, everyone is trying to reduce cost, especially with the COVID situation. The cost is becoming very important, cost savings. And if they can save some cost with deploying Open RAN solutions, then I think they would go for it. And I would say more so, you would see more opportunities where you would have more of private cellular networks, like someone like BMW building a factory for those kind of applications where SLAs are important, but also the cost is important. I think operators could build special Open RAN based solutions for these to cater to these particular markets, which is going to grow a lot in next 10 years.
Yeah, a very interesting thought on which to wrap this up. So, Gareth, Neil, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
And for everyone else, our listeners, thanks for joining this podcast. Do have a look for reports on our website covering from Gareth, covering Open RAN, and also we touched a little bit on mobile edge computing. And I think we've got some more reports coming out shortly on that. And we'll probably do a podcast around that as well. So listen out for that. Until the next time, thanks for joining, and speak to you again soon. Bye now.